Coming up on this week's show, Royal Mail goes retro.
New online-enabled gaming cabinets.
And we talk to Australian video games pioneer John Pasfield.
This week's show is brought to you by Future Publishing, the name behind your favourite gaming magazines.
And The Economist, a smart guide to the forces changing your world.
Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 206, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And a very warm welcome to this week's show. Now, this, of course, is a podcast where we like to call it, we are all still fans of modern video games. We just got to get that out there. But we like to cover what we call the golden age of video games.
The retro age, retro games.
You think about this, the amount of stuff that we've covered on this show over the 4 years that we've been doing this now. Thinking back to, where the video games industry came from, stuff like Pong back in the day, in the late 70s. And now it's the biggest form of entertainment in the world, even bigger than Hollywood, even bigger than music. And every week on the show, we like to explore and get down and dirty and bring you the stories behind the companies and the people who actually made this massive global industry what it is today.
And I think that word's correct, global.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, we've got places like Japan that really innovated with video games. The American industry is totally different to the European industry. And also there's Australia and New Zealand. And today we actually have Australia's premier video games developer.
Now, I know Australia's been in the news for, sad reasons over the last couple of weeks, and obviously any of our audience that are in Australia, hope everything's going all right with you and your family and you're safe. Today, though, we have got a really interesting guest, because we have had Australian guests on before, and it's always interesting to find out what life was like on the other side of the world.
Yeah, so this is John Pasfield, and basically he founded Chrome Studios, which was like the first kind of big Australian video game publisher, but he also worked with the Micro-B, which, we had the BBC computers here when we were at school. I don't know what a Micro-B is, so this is going to be really interesting to hear about the educational one in Australia. But also he did Flight of the Amazon Queen, which was an absolute amazing game for the Amiga, and then it got ported to the PC, but it was in Amos, so they had to do every single line of code and convert that to C.
I'm really excited for this one. I got here, I didn't know who the guest was, as usual, and Ravi's telling me all the games that they've worked on, and a lot of these games are games that I grew up with as well. Destroy All Humans 2.
Yeah.
There was the Tasmanian
Tiger.
There we go. And these are games that I played on the GameCube and stuff like that, and on the original Xbox. So a real broad kind of like reservoir.
Reservoir. And very kind
repertoire.
and kind
Keep
of
that in.
and kind of very Australian themed as well, because a lot of the stuff, like, he's covered surfing games.
Yeah.
He's kind of done stuff like that, genres that you'd expect to come out of the Aussies.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's going to be really interesting. John Pasfield is our guest on the show in around 15 minutes from now. We'll let Joe off as well. He's still got the man flu.
I'll have a little bit.
Now, before we get into that, we need to talk about some really interesting stories this week, including how many people have sent us the Royal Mail gaming stamp story. Oh, amazing to see that. We'll talk more about that in a second. Before we do, though, let's give a huge thank you to a big supporter of the Retro Hour podcast and a company that's allowing us to keep doing this show into 2020. And these are our very good friends at the amazing Future Publishing. Now, Ravi and I know we've talked before on the show about how influential Future have been, to us. I remember reading stuff like Amiga Format and Amiga Shopper and Public Domain magazine back in the day that Future released. They've been going for ages.
What I think is really amazing about it as well is so many people, I don't think realise, grew up on their magazines as well, because they've got so many, they're so broad. Like, obviously they've got so many different gaming magazines, but official PlayStation magazine, official Xbox magazine, you just don't realise that they're behind all these great magazines.
And of course, anyone that listens to our show needs to read Retro Gamer magazine. Every single month you can walk into your local newsagent or get a subscription. They cover everything that's happening in the world of retro gaming and take you behind the scenes on the people that made the games and the systems. This month I've actually got a cover feature all about the Analog Pocket, the handheld to play them all. And also Edge magazine you mentioned then, and they've actually got a cover feature this month called all about the Lord of the Rings, Gollum, the new game that's been unveiled as like the next gen game for the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. They've explored that in the latest issue of Edge magazine.
That's pretty cool. And speaking of the Xbox Series X, official Xbox magazine, they're talking about the rumours, talking about the launch games this month, and also something what I thought was really cool, because there's been a lot of buzz about Bully 2 recently.
Yeah.
Apparently, how Red Dead Redemption 2 was built on Bully's social interactions, which I thought was really cool.
And they've also got the PlayStation official magazine here, and they're looking at the 2020 preview. So I'm thinking exclusive titles there, probably stuff like Last of Us 2.
So whether it's the industry insight provided by Edge or the exclusive insider knowledge of official PlayStation or Xbox, there is something for everyone, and we would like to give you an exclusive offer. Now, if you want to read any of these magazines, subscribe with the Retro Hour podcast. Not only will you be helping out this show, but get this, we want to give you 83% off. That is quite a saving. 3 issues for £3. Normally £18 from the shops. We want to give you 3 issues of your favourite gaming magazine for just £3. Now, all you got to do is tap in this and claim it while it's on. The amount of people we get contacting us a couple of months later going, is this offer still on? You need to claim it while it's running, all right? So head to this website, myfavouritemagazines.co.uk/RH Game. That stands for Retro Hour Game. myfavouritemagazines.co.uk/RH Game with our good friends from Future Publishing. Now, let's talk about these Royal Mail retro stamps then. This kind of came out of nowhere, it seemed, but actually it turned out a few of our friends have been working on these, haven't they?
Yeah, so this is a kind of collaboration with Bitmap Books, Supple Studios and UKIE and the Royal Mail. And it's really interesting to see because, you know, I think this celebrating British video games is a great thing to do, and it should have been done earlier. I've always seen, like, I'm a bit of a stamp nerd, I'm going to get stamp nerdy, but I've always seen really cool kind of little stamp presentation packs.
Yeah.
They did a great Dad's Army one last year, yeah, and this one's amazing, but there's certain things that are going to happen with this one. So there's Easter eggs hidden inside the stamps. Did you know that?
So there.
Wait, you get an Easter egg in a stamp?
Yeah. So Bitmap Books have basically sent out a kind of marketing letter that said there's going to be Easter eggs inside these stamps. So when they come out, which is on the 21st of January, you're going to be able to look inside them and maybe work out some clues and see if there's any hidden messages or references.
I'm
in
calling
these
it now
stamps.
like little dizzies on the back of them or something.
Well, it's a set of 12 postage stamps. So these are going to be, you'll get them on letters and stuff, I imagine. That are floating around.
A lot of people buy these for collecting, and there's a lot of stamp collectors. But one tip is, if you do buy them collecting, I know a lot of people have pre-ordered them now, they won't hold their value unless you go into the post office and get them to stamp the date on it. If you have the date stamped on it, then that's like the first day of issue.
Oh, okay.
And that's what the stamp guys go for.
Oh, really? I did not know that.
What they're talking about here, they are celebrating some of the best British video games of the 80s and 90s. You've got Dizzy, he's in there, Wipeout, Lemmings, Sensible Soccer. There are some really interesting ones that, I would have expected to be on there, but I'm pleased are. Micro Machines.
Yeah, I just saw that one, and I literally just thought of Dan as soon as I saw it.
Which, is one of my all-time favourite games.
Populous as well.
Yeah, and they've got, there's 4 Tomb Raider stamps as well. Obviously one of the biggest British video games franchises ever. But it's great that they're actually celebrating, not only, because I expected Tomb Raider to get a stamp, but seeing stuff like Lemmings and stuff like Dizzy actually getting mainstream recognition from Royal Mail. Obviously having, Bitmap Books working with them, they probably guided them as to which games they should cover, but it's amazing to see. And I've actually been looking through my Facebook feed, and, I've got a lot of contacts on there, work for like Signosis and that, who didn't know these stamps were coming out, and they're like, wow, okay, Lemmings is on the stamp now.
Well, I think they're already selling out of quite a few of the pre-orders that they're getting, and I guess that they've put these ones on because these are the ones that they can get the rights for. Because I saw a lot of people going, "Oh, why isn't Jet Set Willy on there? Why, that's maybe a more iconic kind of title, just in its Britishness. But maybe the rights aren't available, or who knows who owns these games at the moment.
Yeah, that's very true. Actually, come to think of it,
they've got Worms is on one of the stamps.
They made it second class though. Worms is second class.
Oh, what?
Well, if you look at Worms though, they haven't got the names of the worms above them. They've actually taken that out. And I was looking on Facebook the other day, and they said maybe because they're all based on members of the royal family.
Oh yeah.
So I think that's incredible that Royal Mail are putting out stamps dedicated to some of our favourite games ever.
I think people who are away from the UK might like them as well. They might be a nice little kind of British thing, because postage always seems really, the British post box.
Yeah.
having
yeah. It's just
games on
it's
there.
a tourist attraction.
It's kind of making me sad that I don't really get any post anymore. Get on my bills like
You know what?
just-
When Ravi was like, "Oh yeah, these are going to be on people's letters and stuff," and I thought to myself, I don't actually get any post with stamps on. If I do get post, it's all like, pre-stuff from the bank, where it's already like, I was just like, oh, I'm probably not going to get any of these.
I might have to stand up to some like junk mailing lists or something
Yeah.
just to get some stamps. So let's talk about arcade machines are obviously always really exciting to talk about. And Arcade One Up, I mean, they've done some incredible cabinets over the last year or so. And now they're doing NBA Jam. You can play this at home now.
Yeah, so this is absolutely amazing. So for those who don't know, Arcade One Up are a big American company who do 3/4 scale arcade machines essentially for the home.
So these are small.
Yeah, they're smaller. They're like 4 foot tall, kind of 4.5 feet tall, and they're really cool. They're affordable. They are, kind of like game console price, but they're a lot cheaper than going out there and trying to get a retro console, and they're like flat pack as well. They've done some really, really awesome ones over the last year. But yeah, they're bringing out the NBA one, which Ravi has just told me before we started the show, that is completely online enabled.
Yeah. So it's online enabled, which I don't know the scale of this because they're going to be doing some announcements at CES and stuff. But basically, that sounds really cool. If you could do online play between people.
Yeah, I'm hoping it's not just like leaderboards and scores and stuff. But if it's actually like playing against people, that's going to be really cool.
That would be cool. And they're also talking about including a lot of classics now as well. So it's not just a sole NBA Jam machine.
What they tend to do is when they come out, it won't just be like, oh, it's just NBA Jam on here. There's usually like 3 or 4 other games on there. So like the Street Fighter 2 one, I could be wrong on here, but I'm pretty sure the Street Fighter 2 one had Final Fight and then the Punisher beat him up as well.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a fighting cabinet.
Yeah,
really.
yeah. So it was a bit like a fighting cabinet. The Mortal Kombat one had Mortal Kombat 1 and 2 on it. It's never just one game, which is really cool.
So
as well.
there's a couple of these cabs coming out. A Burger Time cabinet, which also contains Karate Champ, Bad Dudes, Caveman Ninja as well.
Proper old school.
Yeah.
And then a sit-down Star Wars cabinet as well.
Oh, wow. They're doing the sit-down Star Wars cabinet?
Yeah, a classic Frogger cabinet and a Golden Axe cabinet as well. You want that Golden Axe.
Well, yeah, I mean, looking at the Golden Axe one, that's kind of a Sega fighting one. I mean, you've got stuff like Golden Axe Shinobi's on there as well, apparently.
Altered Beast,
Wrestle Wars, Golden Axe Revenge of Death Adder.
Well, that's really interesting because Golden Axe Revenge of Death Adder has never had a release other than on arcade. And that's kind of like one of those holy grail games. So that's just giving me a little heart palpitation seeing that's coming out as well.
And Shinobi, that's always one of my kind of go-to games in the arcade. Played it at Arcade Club in Leeds the other month. I'm terrible at it now. I used to get so much further when I was like 8 years old.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, I might need a bit of practice at home. But I do love the fact that, the arcade was always, as a kid, it's sort of yours dreamed. I'd love to have one of these in my house. So the fact that you can get them now for an affordable price.
I think, because I've been eyeing them up for a while, and you can get them on a couple of websites like John Lewis and Very and stuff in the UK, because they're mainly like in Walmart and stuff in America. But, they're starting to come out over here now. I think the Golden Axe one might be the one for me.
Yeah, I do love Golden Axe.
If I was going to get one.
That is one of my all-time favourite multiplayer games.
I've been thinking I've got a small house. I need to get a cabin there. This should fit,
Yeah.
And if it's hackable, I'm going mad on that.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't even going to mention that. I was just waiting for the hacking. Now, speaking of brilliant arcade games, Tecmo, I mean, they were a company that always put out brilliant games. We actually had, because my mum and dad, they ran a pub for a while back in the early 90s, and we had an arcade cabinet in the pub called a Tecmo Night.
Yeah.
And it was also released as Wild Fang. I think for some reason we had the Japanese cabinet. Me and my brother used to absolutely hammer that. And not many people know that game, but it's actually a really good beat 'em up game. So whenever I see Tecmo, they were like one of my favourite arcade development companies. And there's a game called Rygar the Legendary Warrior. Now, this came out in 1986. Side-scrolling fighting game. Really good game, actually. But now it seems that we're actually getting some home ports all these years later.
Yeah, so we're actually getting a Amiga AGA version.
Right.
Which has actually come out, and it looks really fantastic. I've seen a lot of people kind of doing reviews of it at the moment and posting footage of it. Like, the parallax on the back looks really good quality. But that's going to be floppy disk only. I was going, is there a CD 32 release?
I asked Ravi, I says, I've seen that. I've seen a few people posting it. And I was like, are you going to pick it up, Ravi? And straight away he went, well, it's not on the CD 32. So.
but also it's a bit of an improvement on the original arcade, just with the extra kind of features that you could do in AGA. And it comes from the same guys who were behind Bomb Jack Beer Edition.
Oh, right. That was really good, actually. It was a
Yeah.
great port of Bomb Jack they did to the Amiga. Well, with that CD, can you not just make your own CD? And boot it and
Maybe
stuff?
I can make it bootable.
I'm sure that'd be easy enough for you
I
to
want
do.
the official case.
Well, this is a free download.
This is the demo version. It's
Okay,
a
right.
free download, but you can actually buy it boxed.
That's
Right,
what
okay.
I really like about it, the fact that you can get the reproduction like box
Yeah.
and manual and stuff. I always think they look really fantastic.
And I love the fact that you can just get like new retro games in boxes and stuff. It's
Yeah.
just, I mean, I'll be honest, I didn't have many original boxed Amiga games back in the day, but it was always an experience when I did unbox one. Yeah, it was always fun.
Yeah, and there's also seems to be a lot going on with Rygar at the moment because people have just done a ZX Spectrum
Right.
looking port as well for it as well. So I'm not sure how much in development that is, but it's had a specky kind of graphics overhaul. It's a graphics mod at the moment.
Of course, if you want to give it a download, I'll shove that download link and everything else we've talked about this week in our show notes, like we do every week at theretrohour.com. Now, this is a really cool studio in Liverpool.
Yeah, this is a really cool concept, actually. You know, like YouTube Spaces. Have you
Yeah.
heard of this?
What are they then?
Are you allowed in there, Dan? How many subscribers do you have on YouTube?
I've got about 38,000.
You should be allowed in there. So YouTube
The
have
executive lounge.
Yeah, you have to flash your phone on the door. Like, look.
YouTube have an office in London that you can go in for
I've been
free.
there. I've been there.
And if you have 30,000 or more, I think you can get in there, have a cup of tea, sit down, use a bit,
Yeah, I'm just thinking.
use a bit of a
I'm
studio
just-
space to record.
I'm just thinking, like, the Countdown Club and the IT crowd. Yeah. The elite go in there, yeah. So.
To me, it really sounds like when you go abroad, like when you go on a holiday and you can pay that like £50 extra to get into the executive lounge, where you get free drinks and like old fruit and crackers. That's what it sounds like to me. I know it's not, but
Well, it's the kind of the kind of creative space to record videos and stuff. Well, I've just seen this article on the Liverpool Echo about this place called Vide Odyssey Studio.
Right.
And it's in Liverpool, and this place looks really cool. So they've got a TV recording studio in there, and it's just run by dad and son team, Chris and Andy Johnson. And they've got a fully professionally equipped green screen studio that you can
Okay.
film in and come and hire and use that. They've also got a cafe.
all right.
They've also got an arcade in there as well.
Nice.
Very nice.
And they have a VHS 90s video store in there as well.
Oh,
So,
really? What, to buy videos for?
a vast collection available for hire.
Oh,
yes.
for hire?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
wow. Okay.
And a full-scale replica of the Little Shop of Horrors as well, apparently. It's quite random. But yeah, VHS, I mean, we were talking about this before. That recently, I mean, I've been watching AVGN and his kind of, the video shop
Yeah,
rentals
yeah,
that we've
yeah.
been talking about. He did a couple of really good ones over Christmas. Ernest Saves Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a Christmas movie that I watch on my own every Christmas day because no one else in the family ever wants to watch it. And at National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Now, recently, I actually got a video recorder off eBay because I had a load of old tapes. I thought,
Yeah.
I binned a load of them. I had a few left, so I thought I'll buy a video just to have that kind of retro experience. I've actually started buying back all the tapes I threw out about 2 years ago for eBay again now.
My mum still has like a huge chest of them all
Yeah.
because I've still not let her throw them away.
All right.
But heck, am I going to go over and take them from her house and bring them to mine?
Well, there's a real good point actually with VHS and why to still use it, and that is the amount of stuff that's actually been digitized onto DVD
yeah.
is like a quarter or like, even a fifth of what was available back in the days. And we used to have a lot more movie selection. Then you think the amount of stuff that's now streamed is even limited from that. That's
Yeah.
been converted from DVD. And then
Yeah.
you've got all those YouTube crap originals that they shove in there and try and make them seem like new films.
Yeah,
so what
yeah,
we're
yeah.
watching, not YouTube, Netflix.
I know what you
So
meant.
yeah, now what we're watching is a real limited kind of profile of movies compared to the selection we used to have in the 90s.
Yeah, I completely agree because I'm big into like 80s horror films, like 70s,
Yeah.
like like the video nasties and stuff. And often when I'm watching these reviews of them and stuff like that, they're always saying how you can't get it on DVD or there was a limited print of a couple of thousand in like 2001 or something.
Yeah.
And now the only place really to watch these is on VHS. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
I think it's going to stay alive, and there's a huge VHS ripping scene that's now started, and people
Yeah.
trying to get VHS in the highest
Yeah.
quality as possible and kind of do their own
So I wonder
digital
if-
conversions.
I wonder if this is something we're going to see more of them, video game rental shops.
Yeah, I mean, it's cool.
Video tape
shops,
rental
yeah.
shops.
It's
sorry.
weird though because I never thought I would miss VHS, and as a format, I really don't. But there is something. So I've got a little CRT screen in my
Yeah.
home office, and there is something very nostalgic about out. So I've got actually a videotape. It's Ghostbusters 1 and 2.
Brilliant.
Compilation.
Yeah.
In the middle is an old 1960s episode of Batman in the middle of it. I think they were promoting, like, the Batman videos were out.
Yeah.
So I was watching it the other day and it just took me back to being like a kid again, watching that video, sitting there watching Batman, waiting for Ghostbusters 2
I
to
find
start.
streaming as well. I just start clicking through stuff and watching little sections of it. You could do that with VHS.
Yeah.
If you wanted to skip, like, forward, then you'd have to hold it down,
Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to be hooking my VHS player up to my 4K TV and watching film that.
I think you should.
But I actually got, so I was back home at my parents' over Christmas for a bit, and my uncle, he went in his attic, he's having a big clean out, and he found a video recorder. Do you want this? So I've got 2 now. But also he found an old 8mm camera.
Okay.
And there's a load of tapes that me and my brother actually filmed back in the early 90s, and I was watching one the other day, and there's actually my brother and I playing Cool Spot on the Amiga in about 1993 in our bedroom.
Cool.
And I was like, I was watching it in my home office, and I thought, well, I'll get this ripped digital. I might stick it on YouTube if my brother doesn't kill me before I get it on there. He's quite embarrassed. But my missus was like, you two were the first YouTubers. It's like, it's a Let's Play video. It's like, yeah, it's crazy. So, there's some...
You should definitely upload that.
Yeah,
that's pretty amazing.
It's absolutely cringeworthy, but I think it has to be put on there. So, yeah, cool, though. VHS rental stores, I mean, it's... very niche. I mean, again, it's one of those things you don't really see anywhere anymore.
No.
I think, there is something about that really is very nostalgic. And if they can combine it with, obviously, the other part of their business, it probably makes them the money.
And I just think, the kind of the way that we're consuming video now, we're going to get really bored of what's available in the small selection, and they're going to have to look back and start digitizing or buying old rights to old films.
Yeah,
and
for real.
getting them out there,
One thing about digitising videos is you have to watch them in real time as well, which when I've been
God,
doing these
yeah.
camcorder tapes, I've been like, sitting there for 3 hours doing it. So if you want to read more about that, Liverpool Videocity Studios, so we'll put that in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, we've got our retro picks on the way in a minute. Before we do that, let's give a big thank you to another huge supporter of the Retro Hour podcast, and these are our very good friends at The Economist. Now, The Economist covers so much, obviously the economy, finance, but also world politics, business, science, technology, arts, the environment, video games. And speaking of technology, every week we have a look through The Economist for something we found really interesting. And this week, one of our favourite topics, space.
Yeah, so we're actually talking warfare in space here, which is a new thing that, we've not really heard about before. And Americans are seeking a faster way to launch military satellites. So this is crazy. Satellites are really important to us. We get all our communication and information from there. The new kind of trend is shooting down satellites. So India shot down a satellite with one of its own missiles in March, and China blew up one of its own in 2007. So the ante is being upped. But there's a response to this, and this is called responsive space. And the idea of responsive space is that they're going to 3D print parts of rockets, parts of the satellites that they need to get them up there as quick as possible and as cheaply as possible.
So is there nothing you can't 3D print these days?
No.
So that is the kind of thing you can read about in The Economist. They sift through the noise, let you know what's going on in the world around you, and they've been a trusted source of intelligence for over 170 years. So if you're the kind of person who never stops asking questions and you want to know why the world is the way it is and get yourself set up for the next decade, we want to give you your own free print copy of The Economist through your door. So all you have to do, if you want to get hold of a copy of The Economist on us, if you're based in the UK, grab your phone right now and text the word retro and send it to 78070. And of course, you'll be helping out the podcast by doing that as well. Get your own free print copy of The Economist, text the word retro and send it to 78070 with The Economist, the smart guide to the forces impacting your world. Now, also every week on the Retro Hour podcast, we roll out the red carpet to our VIP members. These are people who've made it into the Hall of Fame. Now, I always test Joe out on the Hall of Fame. Let's have a little refresher with Ravi. How do you get in the Hall of Fame?
You go to the retrohour.com, press support, and then you can donate via PayPal in any currency, and you can do recurring payments.
I thought he was going to forget then as well.
No, he knew. I hope he made it.
That would be funny if he forgot. Now, obviously, like we say every week, it's a tip jar. So if you like what we do and you want to put a few quid into the cause, a couple of dollars, a couple of euros, it all makes a massive difference. And obviously, everything we get, 100% goes back into the running of the show. And for doing that, you will get a mention on a future episode in the very prestigious Hall of Fame, like this week, Raymond Montalban,
Bernhard Lucas,
Rob Hubers,
and Paul Kakarevic, who all made donations into the running of the show. And if you'd like to do the same, you'll find the link on our website at theretrohour.com, or you can do it direct from your PayPal app, paypal@theretrohour.com. Now, before we get into our interview this week, chatting to John Passfield, Australia's premier video game developer, we are going to talk about our retro picks now. Now, every week on the show, we kind of, give a bit of love to the retro gaming community and talk about something that's caught our eye this week. Now, I've been looking at a website called the Macintosh Repository. Now, this is a really good website because I've been setting up my old Power Mac G4 ready for a video next week. And this is a website that lets you download loads of old school Mac apps dating from the early 68K stuff right through to the PowerPC era. You can get old versions of Photoshop on there. Pretty much anything you want for the Mac, you can get from this website, and it's completely free to make an account on there too. So I find that website really handy, actually.
It's like a kind of old school Mac app store.
Yeah. Well, there's games on there as well. You can get But what I like about it is, say you want to download Quake for the 68K Mac or the PowerPC, they'll have about 8 different versions of it. Version 1.04C, and all the CD images are all ripped, and the attention to detail that they've done. You can download the covers and make your own CD artwork, that kind of thing. So it's a really good website. Probably the best site I've found if you want to download old school Mac stuff. So MacintoshrEpository.org if you want to check that out. You've been getting into some bassline music this week, then.
Yeah, so this is one of my favourite kind of chiptune artists at the moment. And
Here
this
he
is Harley Likes Music. And what Harley does, we'll wait for the drop. Here we go. He does Sheffield bassline.
So is this is the event that you went to recently? Was he there?
Steel City Chip.
Okay, yeah. Ready? Joe's Raven, throwing shapes. Yeah. I like that.
And it's very kind of Midland sound, but done on Game Boys. And he organises Steel City Chiptune, which is basically...
That's a bit of a tongue twister.
I'll say it again. And he organises Steel City Chiptune, which is basically a big chiptune event where they get different artists every time. And they've got Steel City Chiptune number 3 coming up soon.
And you can buy this as a digital album, $4 as well, which is pretty good value. You've been watching a YouTuber. Who got this week?
So I've been watching Dante Ravioli, his name is.
What a name.
Yeah, what a name. Who, very similar to one of the ones that Ravi actually brought up last week. So this guy, he plays... They're not massively retro, some oldish games like Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 6 and stuff like that. But what he does is he plays them in really silly ways. Can you complete them without shooting any enemies, without killing any enemies? I've been watching his Resident Evil 4 videos, which are my favourite games of all time, just doing really daft, funny stuff, but he's just a funny YouTuber as well. Yeah. He just kind of grabs your attention. You put it on in the background, but before you know it, you're actually fixated on it. Proper, sometimes you put a YouTuber on, you just kind of listen to it, but he really just draws you in with just the way he is. But I love his Resident Evil 4 videos. And there's one called Can Ashley Kill the Knights, which is essentially there's these enemies which are in night armor. You can't kill them usually, but can you kill them by kicking a door open in their face? And he does it 5,000 times or something like that until it dies. So yeah, really, really good videos, really good YouTuber. So
we'll put all our community picks and everything else we talked about this week. You'll find them all in our show notes. And of course, we just want to say, actually, I noticed this week that Spotify is now the world's most popular podcast service.
Yeah, Apple didn't step up their game, did they? They never fixed it, and Spotify's come in and took the crown. Yeah,
took the crown this week. So, a lot of people get in touch and go, are you on Spotify? We are on there. Leave a review if you listen to Spotify.
I love that. Leave a review.
Apple Podcasts, of course, still massive. Google, we're on every service. A lot of people got in touch. So, guy the other day mentioned us through our website again. I'd love it if you just offer the MP3 files for download, which we do on every show, don't we?
Yeah. So if you go on the website, you can download the MP3 straight away. Yeah.
Click on the
it's on the front page. It just says download the MP3.
You can get them all. And any way that you can listen to the show, we've made it available for you. So if you want to get a list, all our services are on the website as well at theretrohour.com. And of course, any reviews that you can leave on your favourite podcast service of choice is massively appreciated and really helps out the show as well. Right then, let's get into this week's special guest, crossing to the other side of the world to chat to John Passfield. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it's time to welcome on this week's very special guest, talking about companies like Chrome Studios, games like Flight of the Amazon Queen as well, talking about educational machines like the Micro B. This should be a really interesting one. Let's welcome on our guest this week, Hello, John Passfield.
Hello, thanks for having me all the way here from Australia.
I was going, what time of day is it there? It must be really early in the morning, is it?
It's just about 6 a.m. in the morning.
Wow.
So I'm up a bit early.
Well, we appreciate you coming on, John. Hopefully you got a coffee at hand.
Definitely have, yes, right here.
Well, before we get into kind of, the games and companies that you've worked on over the years, I mean, to kind of get a bit of your, your geek credentials, we like to do this with our guests. What was kind of your background in computers and gaming then? Where did kind of it all start for you?
Well, for me, I'm a bit of a sci-fi geek, so I was a huge Star Trek fan as a kid, and Star Wars, of course. So I was always into computers and technology, but the kind of defining moment for me was as a kid being at a local sort of a show, or like a fairground show, and I remember seeing I think it was a Commodore PET computer. It's kind of fuzzy, but it was a basically green screen computer. So for me, it was going into this little like tent in surrounded by cows and chickens, and they had a display, and I started playing this game, and I believe it was Colossal Cave, and I hadn't seen anything like this before, and I typed in some commands, and it reacted to what I was doing. I remember picking up an axe, then throwing an axe, and the screen responded that this character, a dwarf on screen, disappeared in a puff of greasy smoke. At that point, I was hooked, and I had to have a computer.
So that was a text adventure game, wasn't it? Colossal Cave.
That's right. Yes, Colossal Cave. Yes, and it was it just blew my mind that such a thing, like, it was reading my mind. It was amazing.
So your first machine was a Micro B, and that was an Australian educational computer. How did this system come about, and was it really popular in Australia?
Yeah, so the Micro B was developed here in Australia, one of the first sort of Australian computers, and it was probably similar to like a BBC Micro. So the idea, it was a keyboard-based computer system with the accessories. It was very popular in Australia, and I believe Sweden was the other country where it was sold. And it was a Z80 chip, and it had a version of Micro Basic built in. And yeah, they used it in schools with things like Turtle computers and some educational programs. So that was also one of my big exposures, was then at high school, actually having microbees at the computer labs. Well, what was basically probably an old tech drawing room with a computer in it. And we ended up getting one of those for home, and that's when I started seriously getting into programming and learning how to actually work the machine.
Were they a budget machine, or were they kind of expensive? Because when we had the BBC educational ones, there weren't that many home users because of the price.
Yeah, I think the similar thing with the Microbee, it was close, I believe, like 399 Australian dollars, which was probably a bit of a price to pay back then. I remember begging my parents to get one, and my dad was really, we don't need a computer. He was a technician, so he was a tech sort of guy. And then he eventually caved in and got one, and he himself actually really enjoyed it. He loved programming little mathematical equations into it. But yeah, it was a sort of situation where I had one. No one else really, even though they're at the schools, no one else had one. And because I started making games on it, I didn't tell anyone because it was such a geeky thing to do. So none of my friends knew that I actually made games on the system.
With the Micro B, were you kind of like self-taught with the programming then, and how did you find that?
Yeah, I grew up in a country town in Australia, which is northern New South Wales. So this is a small town with close to 3,000 people living there. And there were no real, you couldn't go to the library, there was no Google. So the nearest sort of place with any sort of information or knowledge was another town, which is 30 kilometers away. And there were a number of books for the Micro B, and there were two sort of books called the Wildcard series. So I got one of those books, saved up for it and read that and sort of learned how to program from that book. And the other one was, I believe it might have been a British author. There was a whole series of listings, like big book of games you could buy. And these are these almost like Dorling Kindersley, if I'm saying that right, books. And they would have listings in them. And that was a great way for me to sort of type those things out and learn from that, mostly adventure games.
I mean, were there any Australian game developers and companies that you looked up to at the time, or was it stuff from overseas that you were mainly playing?
Yeah, all overseas. There wasn't, again, it was sort of thing where I knew there were computer game companies around, but I didn't see anything like that in Australia at the time. And I'm sure there was. There was Beam, Melbourne House was making stuff in Melbourne, like The Hobbit and great games like that. But I never made the connection that they were here in Australia, even though they're called Melbourne House. So yeah, it was kind of me by myself in a country town making games, and most of my exposure was really through magazines that came in from the US and also from the UK. So I used to go to the local newsagents. Quite lucky that they stocked a lot of great stuff, and we're very lucky that we actually received like the second issue of 2000 AD. Missed the first one, so I never got the little floating disc on the front cover. But that was sort of my introduction. We got a lot of stuff through from the UK and the US, so that was the way I learned about computers.
I remember reading letters in like British magazines back in the day from like readers in Australia. You know, whenever you got like a British reader complaining that, you know, I have to pay like £4 for your magazine, and all the Australian readers would be like, yeah, we like triple the price over here by getting them on import. So it was you had to be quite committed, I guess, to actually pick those overseas mags up at that price.
Exactly, and it was, but it was great because, you know, a lot of the games I felt like I played them, although I never had played them, and that sort of influenced stuff I made. So, you know, I'd read about Jet Set Willy. A lot of those games that were Spectrum games and I guess early Commodore 64 games, and I tried to emulate those games. Halloween Harry is that was the second game I made on the Microbee computer, and you know it had a lot of stuff like I went through and named all the rooms funny names, and that was inspired directly from games I'd read about in the magazines. But yeah, just it would have been great to. I mean, the magazines were expensive, but then also the computers were quite expensive as well.
Well, in grade 10, you created your first game, which was a Pengo clone, Chili Willy. What was the process of kind of creating that game, and how did you end up finding a publisher, especially being at such a young age?
Yeah, so what we had again with the sort of influx of magazines and stuff through our news agency, even though we're a small town, we also had an arcade. So this is back in the 80s. So it seemed like everyone had arcades. So we had stand-up machines like, you know, Space Invaders, and then we had Pac-Man, and then little corner shops. We called them tuck shops. It's like they were always near schools, and you'd have your lunchtime order, and they'd go up to the tuck shop and they'd fill those orders for the kids. They had machines as well, and I got hooked on Pengo, and I was playing that a lot, and I thought I could probably make this. Just be naive and not knowing any better. So I went home. And over the Christmas break for holidays, I sat down and started making a Pengo game. And when I finished it, this was on the Microbee, I thought I should try and do something with this. And in the back of the manual was the company called Honeysoft, and they were the software version or the software label of Microbee computers. So I just made a cassette tape version and sent it down to them. And then, you know, a few weeks to a month later, I got a letter saying, "We love your game. We'd like to include it and publish it." And I wrote back and said, that'd be great. And that was kind of it. There was no contract. And the next thing is they sent me some cassette tapes with my game on it. And the one computer shop where I bought the books and how to program, you know, it was there for sale for like $12.
Do you remember the first time you saw it on a shelf?
You know, I think it was probably, I was shocked when I got it in the mail and seeing this bright orange cassette tape cover. And it was very, the cover was printed on a dot matrix printer. So it wasn't like, you know, the magazines that showed the amazing artwork of like the Spectrum games. It was a bit low rent, a bit cheap looking, but it was an amazing feeling. It was like I didn't quite get it that, you know, this is something that was that I should be, you know, amazed about. Again, I didn't tell my friends that this was out because it was such a geeky thing. And my wife, who I went to school with at the time, she had no clue. Until much later that I'd made these games.
The next game you worked on was Halloween Harry. Was that the following like summer holidays that you worked on that one? And was that a popular title?
Yes, exactly. That was the following holidays, and that was around the time I think Ghostbusters was coming out, and so inspired by that, and also as I said, I was inspired by a lot of the British games I was reading about in the computer game magazines. And so that was basically a room-based game. I wanted to make something original because Pengo, you know, is copyright by I think Sega, and of course Chili Willy is a name which is you know, a cartoon character. So I completely ripped off two intellectual properties making that game. So I thought I'll do something original. So created the idea of Halloween Harry, a ghost hunter, and each room was a set location where you'd run around the rooms, collect items, shoot bad guys, avoid traps, and escape to another room. And when it came out, so they took that and I sent to the Honeysoft and they published it. And it seemed to have a lot of fan followings in Australia. So I get people who still remember the Microbee game, but of course later we remade it. But but it was I was quite proud of it because it was original and it was a fun game.
You know, one thing I love as well about the fact that, you know, you made Halloween Harry, you don't get many seasonal games anymore. And, you know, we were talking over Christmas on the show and Halloween as well. It's kind of a period when I like to play games that are made for that season. And I guess maybe there's something about the fact that, you know, those games are only on sale during that time and they're not going to sell the rest of the year. That could be a reason why you don't get many like Halloween or Christmas kind of games. But I do love the fact that, that there is stuff that is around the holiday kind of times.
Yeah, and I had no clue about that when I was making it. I thought it's spooky and scary. Halloween makes sense. And it was only when we did the remake and Apogee said that very reason. They said you can't call it Halloween Harry because it'll only sell during Halloween. So we had to come up with an alternative name, which was Alien Carnage, starring Halloween Harry. But I do think I look at like Mariah Carey and her Christmas songs, and I think every year it's always there. So it'd be nice to have that game that does sort of at that time of the year just sells bucket loads. That'd be lovely.
And Mariah's Money, it'd be nice.
Oh yes, that'd be great as well.
Well, when was the first time that you saw or heard an Amiga, and were they really popular in Australia?
Yeah, so Amigas were popular, and it's funny because just to go back a bit about getting the Amiga, so I finished Halloween Harry, sent it off to Honeysoft, and then graduated from high school. Then went on to do. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I thought I'd do computers because that's what I was working with at the time. The idea of making a computer game career wasn't really. Couldn't see any way to do that. So I went to university, studied computer science, then graduated. At university, I actually made games. So I made a text-based adventure on the local VAX computer. Then graduated, got a job at a telecommunications company, probably similar to British Telecom, and then completely hated it. And so at that point, I became kind of dispassionate about computers, and I didn't have a computer at home, and I just sort of hated the things because it was so mind-numbingly boring, the job I had. And so when my first introduction to the Amiga was through a friend of mine who I'd met through the comic store. So I was into comics and doing cartoons, and Steve Stamatiadis. And so Steve had, I think, just graduated from arts college, and he had an Amiga computer. And we're talking about comic books, and I mentioned I'd made a game called Halloween Harry. And he said, "Oh, I'd love to make games, and I've got an Amiga computer." And so that was my first introduction. It was like, it was just amazing to see this machine. It literally was like looking into the future. Just the idea of the WYSIWYG interface and the graphics. So I immediately went out and bought an Amiga. I think it was the Amiga 500. And and we both decided, let's make a game. Let's remake Halloween Harry. So I flipped from hating computers after my job to suddenly falling back in love with computers again, thanks to the Amiga.
That's amazing. And was there any challenges porting Halloween Harry to the Amiga, or was it quite smooth?
Yeah, well, there were challenges. So, because again, I programmed my original games in BASIC with a little bit of machine code to do things like sound effects and some stuff where the machine language, the BASIC wasn't fast enough. And so with the Amiga, we bought Amos, and we started using that to develop the game, and it was working fine. But again, it was still a bit challenging. But what happened was we foolishly decided, this sort of leads into, I guess, Amazon Queen. Monkey Island had come out, and we decided to start making another game. And at this stage, we'd met some friends of ours who were also making games because it's a very small community. And so we decided to split it up. So they started taking over Halloween Harry, the actual programming of it. So it was. So we developed it on the Amiga, and also eventually it came out on the PC though.
How did you end up getting it published with Apogee then? Because they were a huge kind of publisher and had some fantastic titles at the time. Yeah.
So what we did was we had Halloween Harry going, and we had a local company in Brisbane where I moved to after graduating university called Menacom, and they did a lot of business software, but they also distributed shareware from overseas, and they were doing the Apogee distribution. So we talked to them about distributing it locally, and through them we had the introduction to Apogee. And yeah, just through that sort of connection, it was George Prasad and Scott Miller from Apogee liked the game, and offered to publish it, and that's how we got the deal with Apogee. Which it seemed so effortless and simple back then, but it was very fortuitous because these guys went on to make some amazing shareware games and publish some awesome stuff. And so to be there at that time was very serendipitous, I think, and very, very lucky.
Well, you mentioned Monkey Island there as well. I mean, I was a huge fan of that game when I was a kid. Pretty much all the LucasArts adventure games they released. One thing I loved about Monkey Island as well, I mean, was this kind of an inspiration to you, was kind of, the sense of humour that was in the game as well. It wasn't like really serious.
Oh, totally. And it was that moment, we're working on Halloween Harry, making this platform game, which was great fun. And then we went over to a friend who was who I met Steve through the comic shop, and this friend of ours actually ran the comic shop, but he was a huge PC gamer, and he had Monkey Island, and we started playing it, and it was a light bulb moment seeing this game, which, as you said, was incredibly funny, but it was like a comic book come to life. And both Steve and I, being huge comic fans, and making games now in our spare time, we've got to make a game like this. And so Monkey Island was in fact in my office here right now I've got Monkey Island hanging up on my wall, the poster of that, because it's a big inspiration as well.
You then went on to do Amazon Queens. How did you guys kind of go around the concepts of it and like the storylines and ideas? How did you come up with those ideas?
Yes, so after playing Monkey Island, there was we went and started to play as many games as we could, and we were gravitated towards Lucasfilm games because they just were, no offense to Sierra games, but they tended to have some logical puzzles where you kind of died for no reason, and Lucasfilm games are just free-flowing and fun to play. So we played Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, and I think The Fate of Atlantis was in development when we came up with the idea of ours, and it came out before us, but we wanted to do an Indiana Jones style of game because we love the idea of adventure in Indiana Jones, big fans, but we thought we'll just diverge from what Lucasfilm are doing, which is, a character who's in search of archaeological items, and he always has supernatural elements. So Steve and I were big fans of 40 and Times as well, so we went through and read through all the 40 and Times magazines, a lot of stuff with the Crystal Skull, the idea of ancient gods and aliens. So we thought, let's go down this path. So we created the idea of Joe being an American. We set it in the 50s, and then we come up with the idea of it being science fiction themed and having the whole element being science fiction based. So that's sort of how we came our idea. So it was definitely a riff on Indiana Jones. And again, we wanted to make it really funny. I'm not sure that we succeeded on that, but we had people who really enjoyed the game.
Which tools did you use to create the game, and kind of how big was the team?
Yeah, so the tools we used was, again, Amos. And Amos was perfect for that. So I wrote the game editor in Amos. So we built this editor first where we could load up a graphic screen and start plotting out little walk zones and hotspots to click on. And then we exported that file out for the actual game engine to read in. So the entire game was playable start to end in Amos. And the team size was initially just myself and Steve. So I did the programming and the editor and writing and design, and Steve did the art and design as well. And so it was just the two of us beavering away. And at this stage, from the success of Halloween Harry, we actually set up an office. So we had a little place in Brisbane. And so it was the two of us by ourselves in there for a while, working away on this game, basically completely Amiga-based until we signed with Renegade. And at that point, we started building out the PC version, which then was rewritten in C.
Well, I've always thought, out of any genre of video game, adventure games have got to be one of the most complex to do because of all the different routes the players can take and tying all the story together. The game took, was it 4 years to make that? And obviously when it came out, it was pretty late in the day for point-and-click adventure games. Did it take longer than you expected, and was it a bigger challenge? Yes,
it was quite a lot. It was funny because I've got a diary I wrote, and reading back to that diary, I was sort of getting depressed because it was taking so long. And now looking back at it going, there was literally two of us, and we ended up getting another guy. So Steve and I did the bulk of the work. We had a guy called Tony Ball in to help with the porting. But really looking back at it now going, 3 to 4 years to make a game with two people is not a bad thing. Yeah. But at the time it felt like we were taking forever. So yeah, it took a while, but I think in hindsight it wasn't that bad, but we should have probably staffed up and got more people on board. But we were just so into just doing everything ourselves back then. And I think also the Amiga at that point was starting to slow down in sales as well, I believe. We still we had a great deal. So Renegade was the publisher, and they were the company co-founded with Bitmap Brothers, Mike Montgomery, Steve, and Eric Matthews. And they had an amazing deal structure where we actually had a 50% split with those guys. So even though the sales weren't, as good as they could have been if we'd released earlier, we actually made money out of that to keep us going as a company up until we formed Chrome. So so it was definitely a success for us.
Well, I heard EA came to kind of see the titles before you did the deal with Renegade, and what did they say about the titles?
Yeah, so we had on the Gold Coast a distribution company, arm of EA, Electronic Arts, and again, was so naive back then because we were in our early 20s making these games, and I'd called up a company in Melbourne who distributed games and said, look, we've got a game we want to sell, and they said, you'll probably make a few $1,000s, that's all you'll make out of it. And at the point I'm going, this doesn't sound right because this company's in the US and the UK and getting these magazines where they're obviously making money. So we found Electronic Arts on the Gold Coast, went down and saw them, and we sort of had a handshake agreement. They said, this is great. So we were very excited, and we didn't think to ask for advances or royalties or even an agreement. And so, a few months later, we had Amazon Queen, but we also had Halloween Harry playable and running. So this is before we signed Halloween Harry with Apogee. And we went down to the Gold Coast, and they had their, I think it was the head of Europe coming out called, I'll say his name, Mark Lewis. And he came out to review the games. So it was a big day for us. We're all excited. We drove down to the Gold Coast, which is a hour or so drive. We set up our computers. We had the Amiga showing Halloween Harry and the PC with Amazon Queen, and we thought these are great. And in walks the guy from EA, and he says, "I will put my hand out to shake his hand." He said, "Oh, don't bother telling me your names. I won't remember them." And at that point, it was, "Oh, this is not good." And then for the next 10 minutes, he just tore strips off us, telling us how terrible the games were. That Halloween Harry should be on the Amiga. It shouldn't be on the PC, because we had the Halloween Harry running on the PC, and we had Amazon Queen on the Amiga. He told us that the Amazon Queen shouldn't be on the Amiga. It should be on the PC. That's where the market is. LucasArts game or Lucasfilm games at the time were had to be 10 times better than what they were. It wouldn't sell. It was terrible. And then he just stormed out of the room.
Oh, God.
And we sat there dumbfounded, and we weren't expecting this, because we thought, oh, this is great. We're going to get probably this is where we'll get an agreement signed up. And I looked at the Australian guys, and I said, what does that mean? And he went, I guess we're not publishing it. And we were just dumbfounded. We packed our computers up, and we sort of walked out, and I said, oh, thanks for nothing. And we got back to Brisbane, and we were all completely, depressed with the whole thing. And I thought, bugger this. So I got all my, luckily, collection of magazines from over the years, like, CU Amiga and all those magazines that I was buying every week, and went through and just got a list of every single publisher in the UK. So Ocean and Renegade and US Gold, and put together a disc of Amazon Queen and sent them off to each of the publishers, just hoping that we might hear something back. And and Renegade was the cool kids at the time, because they were publishing a joint venture with Bitmap Brothers, who did Speedball and, as you guys know, all those great games.
Yeah. And
it was then a month or so later that we got a phone call, like late at night, I think it was late at night. It was a guy called Graham Boxall, who was a producer for the Bitmaps, and said he liked the game. And it was amazing. So it was like suddenly somebody saw the value in what we'd made, and that's how we sort of led on the way to get published by Renegade.
Who needs EA anyway?
That's right. Ironically, though, having through my career, I worked at Pandemic, and ironically, EA acquired the company. So I ended up quite not by choice becoming an EA employee. So it was very odd. Having said that, though, they're very nice to work for, and they do have a free Game of the Month club, which is nice.
Well, obviously, back in the day, having a really attractive box on the shelf could be like a big part of what would sell a game. I mean, how much involvement did you have in that? Because I know the cover art was different for the American version, wasn't it?
That's right. And what was great with Renegade was they were just such a really forward-thinking company and really creator-friendly. So when we signed with them, not only did we get like a 50-50 revenue split, we had full control and final say on artwork and packaging. And they were really inclusive. So we actually flew over to the UK for a few months to finish off the game and do voice recording, and then look at all the artwork and that sort of stuff. And we had a friend of mine, Pete Mullins, who actually I work with at the moment. We're doing watch games and some new games together. He's a comic book cover artist, and he did the art, the box art. So it was pretty amazing. So we did all that, and we had a dream run. And it was amazing to see that as a box on the shelves. It was incredible. But with the US version, was Renegade at that stage was negotiating, I think, a sale to be sold to another company, and Warner Interactive bought them. And so immediately that even though our agreement said we had full say over everything, the Warner side didn't really care. So they presented to us this new artwork, which was, as we looked at it, it was like a still shot of a guy playing golf. And they'd obviously painted over it with Joe King. And they had, in the background, they had things like cobras, which you don't find in South America, which is where the game was set. So it was a terrible cover. And by that stage, it was kind of like, oh, here's the cover, and we're going with this. And we didn't have any time to say, hang on, that's not a very good cover. We need to change it. And it sort of came out with that cover. Yes, that's why the covers are very different. We had little control over that because of the company sale. But it's fun to look back at, because it really is. I don't know if you've had a close look at it, but It's yeah. As I said, I think Joe's still wearing golf shoes in the picture they painted.
I've got it on Google now.
Yeah, he is. He actually is wearing golf shoes.
And he's like a golf pose with the baseball bat. It's just, it's pretty bad. Which I'm biased, but.
Well, we recently talked to Pixel Heart Games as well, and they mentioned that they've just got your permission to do a Dreamcast port. Do you think it's kind of crazy seeing people porting your game for old systems in 2020?
It is incredible. I mean, because I had this situation a few years back where I was contacted by an Israeli company who wanted to bring it to the iOS and Android, and then Robert reached out as well with regards to the Dreamcast. And I think it's incredible because I love my Dreamcast. It's in the garage. I'll have to dust it off to play it. But the thought that there's It's not surprising actually because I listen to your show every week and I know there's a huge market for retro games and this idea of doing demakes now or remakes on on the systems. So I'm just honoured that it's going to be there. It's incredible. One thing that we did do, or I did at least when I got the rights to Amazon Queen back, because from Chrome we sort of had all our rights within Chrome. When I left Chrome, I took rights back to my old games. I had the freedom then because I owned it. I could do things, and so I made it freeware. And the Scum VM community took it and really made it accessible so anyone could play it on any system. And I think that's really helped giving it life. If I hadn't have done that, I think it would have been probably a dim memory in the history of computer games. But as it is, it's being able to be ported to many systems. So that's pretty crazy that all these years later, people are still playing it.
And it's great the games are more accessible now than they've ever been, isn't it? That vast back catalogue, it's crazy. You can just play them on anything now.
It is great. And I think this is the importance of owning your own games or owning your own intellectual property, so to speak, because, you could have a situation where if it was like a bigger company, they might bury it because they don't want anyone to do anything with it, but it's not worth their while to do it themselves. And situations with Robert and Liron, who's doing the iOS version, they're very small companies and they can, a lot of stuff's driven by passion. And I think that's really exciting because then the fans and people who have these old systems, it's not like Electronic Arts is going to make a Dreamcast game anymore, but there are fans out there who love these games and as almost like a hobbyist type thing or a small company can do it. So I think owning your own intellectual property lets you then talk to these people and actually say, yes, go ahead, make this. So it's very exciting.
Well, a thing that we always kind of associate with Australia is surfing. And we're wondering, were you surprised that there wasn't that many surfing titles out there, especially with popularity of games like Tony Hawk's Skater? And I do remember some early surfing ones like California Games and stuff like that. What made you kind of get into surfing titles?
Yeah, that was really interesting. So Steve and I were based in Brisbane here, and we finished Amazon Queen, and we're making lots of little prototypes, and we're trying to get a new game off the ground called Stereo Jack, and we almost had it signed with Renegade, but that at the stage, the company had changed and was Warner Interactive, and we were approached by somebody who wanted to make a bodyboarding game. So the very first one we made was Mike Stewart's Pro Bodyboarding, which was on the PC, and it was a game where you bodyboarded. It was in 3D. And that was great for us to learn more 3D technology. And there weren't that many games. He was a passionate. He was actually Robert Walsh. So he became one of the co-founders of Chrome Studios. And so he was passionate. He was a surf photographer and loved bodyboarding and surfing. And there was a big gap in the market at that stage. And then with Pro Bodyboarding, we used that to get a deal with, I believe, Mattel or one of the other companies in the day, and made a surfing game. And so, so that's how that sort of came about. But once we did that, I think we started seeing things like Kelly Slater's surfing and a lot of other ones coming out. So the market sort of started growing then.
So after that, what made you decide to start Chrome Studios?
It was a bit challenging. We actually made, before we founded Chrome and did Pro Bodyboarding, we actually made a sequel to Halloween Harry. So we made Halloween Harry along with Amazon Queen. We made a sequel called Zombie Wars. And this is back in 96, and we decided to do that digitally, distributed, and you can play with credit card. We're just a little bit too ahead of the curve, and the PC market was challenging. And at that point, we had our PlayStations, and we were like, this is amazing. We've got to be here. And so when we did Pro Bodyboarding and talking to Robert, we thought, look, let's put our eggs into the one basket and create console games. So that's where we wanted to move to. So that's how Chrome came about. This passion to make console games. And one thing we're missing, Steve and I, was the kind of business nous, and that's where Robert came in, and we went and started shopping around Mike Stewart's, and Robert got us deals, and you needed to have a publisher in order to make console games. So that's how Chrome sort of began. It was really about us making console games and sort of growing a company, and that really came out of that collaboration with Robert, making Pro Bodyboarding, and then showing that we had the chops to make 3D games, which is what you needed to make PlayStation games.
And one big 3D game that you did, obviously, was Ty the Tasmanian Tiger. And I remember reading reviews of that when it came out, people comparing it to like Mario 64 and Crash Bandicoot as well. Where did the concept of doing this like really high energy 3D platformer game come from, and what titles did influence it?
Yeah, so Steve and I were big fans of, obviously, Mario, loved Mario, and Spyro the Dragon was a big influence as well. Like, we loved Spyro the Dragon. And one thing that, because being Australian, and we kept seeing all these characters that were like, I think Crash Bandicoot technically I think is Australian, or at least he's from, he's Antipodian. And I remember Coco, his girlfriend, is his girlfriend or his sister? Or either way, she had an American accent, and it sort of drove me nuts, going, what? It's just completely wrong. And the color palette in the game when they went to the islands was all wrong. And we loved, I said, Mario and Spyro. We thought, let's make our own version. Let's do an Aussie one. And so, again, a bit like when I was a kid, and over Christmas time I made Halloween Harry and Chili Willy. When the company shut down in Chrome for the Christmas break, we decided to do some prototyping, and we created the first level of Ty with the character. And it was literally a bunch of us. We had a thing called Beer O'Clock, where at 5 p.m. we'd all stop and have beer on Fridays. And on the last Friday before holidays, we started brainstorming some ideas with a bunch of the guys at the company, and we're throwing in, he could have boomerangs, and should be from Tasmania. Let's make him a Tasmanian tiger. And so it came together really quickly, and myself and another guy, Robert, did some programming and put together the concept. Steve did all the art, and we had a playable level where you run around and jump around like mangrove swamps, and little character had boomerangs you through. So that's sort of where the idea came about. It was really from the love of these great classic platform games, and then it sort of grew from there. And I think also Jak and Daxter came out as well, and that was a big inspiration. Just the colourfulness of the world.
I saw there's actually been a Kickstarter recently. Is that like an HD remaster then of Ty coming out soon?
Yeah, so it's actually out now. So Ty came out on Steam, and that was the first iteration, and it oddly enough became one of the highest rated Steam games. So, because when we first released Ty, it was, there was a little bit of people thinking it's a bit silly and a bit over the top, very, very Aussie. But apparently there's a lot of kids, I guess now, who are adults who are on Steam and love it. So it came out on Steam first, and then with the Kickstarter, that was to get it going on the Switch, Xbox One, and PlayStation 4. And I believe all the targets are hit. So it should be coming out quite soon on those platforms. And I'm excited. I have nothing to do with Chrome. I left Chrome in the mid-2000s, but I'm very excited to play the game because it is fun to play, and I had a great time working on it.
Well, you also based loads of voices and dialogue on real people. So did you have like a lot of your mates and stuff and kind of staff members in Ty the game?
Yeah, totally. The entire characters, they're all drawn from people we know. So we had our associate producer Lindsay. He sort of dressed. His dad was a research scientist who does work with turtles up north, and he actually did I believe. Like marine biology, and so he became one of our producers, and he'd wear the typical Steve Irwin green khakis, and so Ranger Ken in the game is based on him. We had Walshy he had a nickname Duke. The Americans called him Duke, so we made him a character in the game. He was a surf life-saving platypus. Bruno, one of our lead artists, his girlfriend was Shazza, so we put her in the game as Ty's girlfriend. So yeah, we put a lot of our friends and family in there, and what's really interesting is a lot of the dialogue. We again, like Amazon Queen, we're inspired by a lot of British TV shows and American TV shows for jokes. We went back and mined a lot of the Australian culture. We had characters like a TV presenter who used to present science shows. His name was Julius Sumner Miller, and we made Julius the Koala that character. And we're very lucky that we got to work with some great Australian voice talent. We recorded in the UK, but the great thing is there's a lot of Aussies, as you probably know. If you go to a pub, chances are you'll be served by an Australian. So we got a lot of Australian voice talent over there as well. And yeah, it was just great to have that it really was not just myself but the entire team. It was the flavor of the team in the game, and even down to things like artwork. The people were referencing material from places where they lived and making sure that the color palettes of the trees and just the way things looked like they do in Australia. So yeah, for us it was very personal. It was a great experience.
So another big successful game you worked on was Destroy All Humans 2. It must have been really fun working with some big actors like Anthony Head. How was that?
Yeah, well, that was really fun. I didn't actually work with Anthony Head, unfortunately. That was our director in the US.
Okay.
But I did sit on some sessions.
Yeah.
But having those guys, because again, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, a huge fan of that show, and having Anthony in the game was pretty amazing. Even though I didn't sit in on the sessions, it was just good to have him in a game that I worked on. That was pretty exciting, and it was good for me because I came in as the creative director on that. So I'd sold my shares in Chrome, took a break. Pandemic was set up here in Brisbane, Australia, and I knew the guys who worked there. And Brad Welch, he was the one of the creators of Destroy All Humans, and he was the lead designer, creative director on the first one. And he'd finished the big slog of getting the first one out the door. And he was like, I just want to sit back and design levels. I don't want to have to manage this whole process. And I kept getting a call from Pandemic to come in and have a chat and look at their game because they were finishing up Destroy All Humans. And Brad decided he wanted to have a bit of a break next. And eventually I was turned into sort of like job interviews. So eventually they said, would you like to work on the next one? And at this stage I'd been going in and giving them notes and just playing the game. And it was a really fun game. I thought this would be really cool. So that's how I ended up becoming involved in Destroy All Humans 2 and being creative director on that. And it was great working with so not only having the great voice talent like Anthony Head, but we just had a really great team of people who I'd played their first game and was a fan of their game. And I got to work with them in making the second one. So that was really cool.
Well, when did you leave Chrome then? Was it 2005? What was kind of the story there?
Yeah, so it was probably business, not creative conflict, more business conflict. Just the way one of the directors was taking the company, I didn't agree with. So at that point, I decided I should leave, and so it wasn't. I wasn't happy with how it was going, which is a bit sad because I think one of the great things with Chrome is we always had this idea of creating something original, but also doing licenses. So Chrome had a lot of licensed things like we did like Barbie's Sparkling Ice Show, we did Goofy Extreme Skating, skateboarding, but we're also doing original properties like Ty, and had a game called Cat Burglar in the works, and we'd set up a sort of a structure trying to get harness or foster the upcoming talent, other people in the company. So we had sessions where people would pitch their game ideas, and we had a few really cool ideas that we were because up to that point it was sort of Steve and I were the creative directors, and we were the guys making this is our game, make it. We had some really cool stuff in development that people were prototyping that we were hoping to take out, and they were all original properties. Sadly, I think they kind of went the way where it was really just making licensed products, which isn't a problem, but it's a problem if you're tens of thousands of kilometers away from a head company. So when the global financial crisis hit, Chrome only had licensed products. They didn't have any original stuff in development, and they didn't own anything. So the first thing that happened was all the companies went, well, we're going to pull this back internally or not develop it. And so that really impacted not just Chrome, but a lot of companies in Australia. So I'd left before that GFC happened and before the collapse of Chrome. But it's a shame because I think it could have kept growing and could have been strong. The embers of Chrome are still there. There's a small team, and that's the ones who are behind the Kickstarter and getting the updates out.
Well, what are you working on these days then?
So I've been doing games my entire life, and I still do games now. But I thought I'll just do a bit of a break and do some enterprise work, so non-game work, because I'd only done games at that point. And the job somebody wanted me to do was exactly this work I'd done 10 years before at Pandemic. I thought, I don't want to do this again. And I was also really keen just to make cool mobile games, and I had an Apple Watch, and I wanted to make Apple Watch games. And I thought it's easy to do that if my day job isn't games. It's easy for me to own my own game technology if I'm working for an enterprise which doesn't care about what I do. So that's what I've been doing for the last few years. But I've been making lots of games. So I've done a number of Apple Watch games. The most recent one is a game called Kepler Attack, and it's doing really well on the App Store. And again, I mentioned a friend of mine, Pete, who did the artwork for Amazon Queen. We're developing another game right now, which we're gonna do a live development. We're gonna put it out on the web, so you can play it in the web browser, and start developing it live. But yeah, so that's what I'm doing. So I'm still making games. I'm still getting stuff out there, but a lot more smaller and personal projects. And the one I'm working on right now, as I was going through some of my notes for this podcast, I was going through and I found a design document from 1994 for the very game that Pete and I are making now. Because I said to him, I've been wanting to make this game for years, and I didn't realize how many years it was. But hopefully that'll be out this year.
What's that going to be then? Any teasers?
Yeah, it's a movie game. I want to make a game about making movies. And there's a few of them being made over time, but it's basically it's very simple because again, being indie and just the two of us, we can't make a big 3D game. So it's a very simple sort of 2D game with you doing the moment-to-moment decisions of, as a producer, what do? Do you hire more staff? Do you make a sci-fi or do you make a western? And it's that sort of style of game. It's not technically a retro game, but the idea comes back from '94, which is almost retro now.
Hey, well, John, it's been so interesting talking to you this week, and we'll put in our show notes, people if they want to track down the reboots of Ty and Flight of the Amazon Queen, where they can get them from as well. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your stories with us this week.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor, and love the show. Big fan. Thank you.
Enjoying the show? Why not check out some other great retro gaming podcasts like Retro Asylum, RGDS, Maximum Power Up, Arcade Attack, Arcade Perfect, and the 10 Pence Arcade.